All right, this is one of those rare occasions I feel compelled to share here. Normally, I manage issues privately as they aren't usually this severe, but this situation has reached a new level of complexity. Let me explain the whole scenario from the beginning. In my household, my husband Bobby has an incredibly close bond with his family, especially his parents. His devotion to them is so profound that he unquestioningly fulfills their requests, no matter the demand. This unwavering trust and dependence on his family is becoming problematic, though he fails to see it. Whenever I attempt to discuss this with him, he reacts with frustration and dismissiveness. The core issue here, and the reason I'm turning to this platform for advice, is that Bobby has always excessively indulged his parents' wishes from the outset. I understand the desire to care for one's parents. I would certainly do the same if my parents lived closer. However, there should be reasonable limits, which Bobby seems to ignore. Since we both began earning steady incomes, his parents have frequently requested money from us. It's not that they are struggling financially. They are quite comfortable and can afford various luxuries on their own. Initially, I was sympathetic because they were Bobby's parents, and I recognized the need to integrate them into our lives. But as time passed, my discomfort grew. We've sent them a substantial sum over the years, enough that we could have financed a couple of international vacations with these savings. I've tried to convey to Bobby that while we live comfortably, it's unwise to funnel all our extra resources to his parents, as it leaves us with little savings for future needs, such as planning for children or making significant purchases. Initially, it seemed he grasped my perspective, but the discussion soon turned into an argument. He maintained that since we're living well, why shouldn't we help his parents with the extra money we have? This conversation isn't about refusing to support them. It's about balancing that support with our needs and future plans. I'm reaching out here in hopes of gaining some perspective on how to handle this delicate balance in our family dynamics. However, Bobby remains steadfast in his decision to continue financially supporting his parents. This stance of his left me furious to the point where I nearly walked out that night. My anger intensified as I recalled their past treatment of me. If they had been kind and made me feel like a genuine part of the family, perhaps I could have been more accommodating. Unfortunately, they were anything but welcoming. They never really accepted me as one of their own, and they weren't there for me when I needed them most. Back when Bobby and I were just starting, right after my graduation, and not long after he began his career, we weren't in a strong financial position. We didn't have the means to buy a house. I vividly remember the day we sat down with my in-laws, poured out our struggles, and sought their help to begin our journey toward homeownership. However, their immediate response was a refusal. They didn't even pause to consider our request. Instead, they lectured us for an hour about adult responsibilities and the importance of saving, advice that felt more dismissive than helpful. Despite my frustration, I held my tongue, choosing to keep my thoughts to myself. It was disheartening to see them unwilling to assist their son. I resigned myself to accept their stance if Bobby was at peace with it. However, the issue resurfaced when I inherited a house from my mother about a year and a half ago. It was a lovely property, but it required significant renovations. We had saved some money, but not nearly enough for the necessary repairs. This repeated pattern of needing financial assistance and facing rejection from his parents, who continued to demand our financial support without reciprocity, put a strain on how I viewed our relationship dynamics. This ongoing financial tug-of-war highlighted a painful imbalance, their willingness to take from us without offering support in our times of need. Faced with the need to renovate the inherited house to make it livable, we approached my in-laws once more, hoping they might help us with a modest sum. However, they refused yet again. This time, they urged us to earn our own money and cease asking for theirs. They even went so far as to suggest I sell the house and invest in something actually useful, dismissing the house as something that looks like crap. Their words were a blow to me. This house wasn't just a structure, it was a cherished link to my mother. I bit back my hurt and anger at their harsh words, thinking it impolite to react at the moment, though part of me now wishes I had spoken up. Perhaps that might have curbed their blatant disregard. Undeterred by their rejection, I resolved to restore the house on my own. I worked tirelessly, scraping together funds and pouring my effort into renovations. Over time, as I began to earn more, managing the project became somewhat easier. After months of hard labor, the house was transformed into something wonderful, a home that I was immensely proud of, a true testament to my dedication. A few months later, I had the opportunity to showcase my efforts. I invited my in-laws over for dinner to celebrate my mother-in-law's birthday, by which time the house looked stunning. I had hoped the evening would go well, considering the usual dynamics of such gatherings and the pride I felt in my accomplishments. Whenever the topic isn't about money, conversations with my in-laws tend to be relatively peaceful. But when it comes to finances, there's hardly a moment free from discussion. On the day they visited to see the renovations, I could tell they were utterly surprised by the transformation of the house. As soon as they walked in, their eyes widened. Clearly, they hadn't expected such extensive improvements. Internally, I was amused by their reaction, knowing full well they hadn't anticipated that I'd go to such lengths. They showered the house with compliments, which at first felt flattering. Yet it quickly became overwhelming as they meticulously inspected every corner, incessantly inquiring about the costs involved. Their curiosity might have been natural, especially since they knew our financial constraints and hadn't contributed financially. Nevertheless, their persistent questions seemed less about appreciation and more about gauging how much money we'd poured into the renovations. It felt intrusive and somewhat demeaning, as if the value of my efforts was reduced to mere figures. The dinner that night started smoothly with enjoyable conversation. However, the atmosphere shifted when my mother-in-law steered the discussion toward dream vacations. She asked me about my ideal getaway, but her disinterest was palpable. She seemed to be merely waiting for me to finish. Her sudden excitement after my brief response felt contrived, which made me suspicious. It didn't take long for the true motive of their visit and all the peculiar behavior to surface. They wanted our help to finance a vacation home. After years of turning down our financial requests, here they were, asking us to contribute to a luxury they desired, a vacation house they wanted despite being well off. Why they couldn't save for it themselves was beyond me. They assumed that because I had managed to refurbish my home beautifully, we must be wealthy. Their assumption was so far from the truth. When I probed further to understand their needs and the reasons behind their desire for a vacation home, their explanation was simply that they were bored with their lives and wanted a change of scenery on the weekends. I was astounded and frustrated by their entitlement. As I expressed that we didn't have funds to spare for such extravagances, Bobby's reaction shocked me further. He looked at me as if I had committed a great offense and sternly told me that spending on his parents' happiness was never a waste. His words and glare, suggesting I needed to watch what I say, were baffling and painful. This response underscored a deep-seated issue in our priorities and understanding of financial responsibility. Bobby knew deep down I was right. A vacation house is hardly a necessity, and it certainly isn't a matter of life and death. My father-in-law is still employed, and they have the means to save up for such luxuries on their own, but it seemed they preferred to have us foot the bill for their comfort. Then it struck me. Bobby isn't an only child. He has an older brother, Jack. So, why weren't they asking him for the money? When I brought this up, the atmosphere became tense. They seemed ready to make my life difficult. It turned out that Jack wasn't as financially stable, or so they claimed. They didn't want to burden him because, unlike us, he had children and his expenses were primarily directed towards his family. I pointed out that Jack's financial situation was similar to ours. He earned roughly the same, but his funds were allocated to his children's needs. I mentioned our plans to start a family and how continuous financial support to my in-laws could jeopardize our ability to provide for potential future children. Their response was dismissive. Since we didn't have children yet, they argued we should have funds to spare. This soon morphed into emotional manipulation, aimed not at me, they knew I wouldn't budge, but at Bobby. They lamented their loneliness and boredom, now that both sons were occupied with their own families. They painted a vacation house as some sort of remedy for their supposed solitude, and Bobby, ever the dutiful son, was swayed by their emotional pleas. I found myself in a precarious position, trying to navigate these increasingly fraught discussions without letting my in-laws sense that they had cornered us. However, the situation escalated drastically. Just a week ago, Bobby and I had the most intense argument we've ever experienced. Though there was no physical aggression, his words were piercing. He declared that the $420,000 he planned to give to his parents wasn't just mine to decide on, suggesting he had the right to do as he pleased with it. He claimed he had been considerate by previously seeking my input, but no longer felt compelled to do so. The argument reached a peak when he actually went ahead and transferred the money to his parents without any further discussion with me. I only learned of this when my mother-in-law casually mentioned receiving the funds. I was livid not just about the money, but the lack of respect for our mutual decision-making in our marriage. This secretive act on his part left me feeling deeply betrayed, igniting a fierce debate over our financial priorities and respect within our relationship. Bobby was fully aware that I was against his decision, yet he chose to proceed and donate the entire $420,000 he had saved over the years to his parents, not sparing a single dollar for us. When I confronted him, urging him to retrieve the funds, he dismissed me abruptly, insisting on managing his relationship with his parents his way. Despite my efforts to remind him that as a couple, we should make such significant financial decisions together, he wouldn't listen. Our ongoing disagreements seemed to have exhausted him to the point where, amid a heated argument, he shockingly threatened me with divorce. He yelled, declaring that if I interfered with his decision to support his parents financially, he would end our marriage and leave me. This threat was utterly absurd to me. I had stood by him through every high and low, and now he was ready to abandon our marriage over prioritizing his parents' desires over our collective future. I questioned him. Did he not care about the plans we made together, about building a life, having children, and finding happiness as a unit? None of it seemed to matter to him anymore. His focus was solely on fulfilling his parents' wishes while I felt neglected and sidelined. In a moment of anger, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. It's been a week since that day, and he hasn't returned home. Despite my numerous texts, calls, and voicemails, he continues to ignore me or leave me hanging. The hurt runs deep because I never imagined something like this could drive Bobby away. I reached out to my in-laws only to discover that Bobby has been staying with them since he left. He hasn't come home once. I'm overwhelmed with stress and confusion about what the future holds, grappling with the fear of what seems like the potential end of our marriage over a disagreement that feels so trivial yet so profound. As the days turned into more than a week with Bobby not returning home, I reached a pivotal decision point. Initially, I was hesitant, unsure whether severing ties was the right move. But the ongoing chaos and the blatant disregard shown by Bobby and his family solidified my resolve. If Bobby was threatening divorce, then perhaps that was the inevitable path we were headed toward. So, I took proactive steps and contacted my lawyer the first chance I got that morning. My lawyer informed me of my options, not only regarding the divorce but also about potential legal actions I could pursue given the circumstances. After our comprehensive discussion, another stark realization hit me. I no longer wanted to be tied down by the memories encapsulated within the walls of the house my mother had left me. The house, once a symbol of maternal love, had become a constant reminder of the tumultuous times with my husband. Determined to move forward, I decided to sell the house. It was entirely in my name, a parting gift from my mother, which legally allowed me to sell it without Bobby's consent and use the funds as I saw fit. The sale turned out to be quite profitable and significantly eased the financial burden of the legal proceedings. The very next day, after finalizing the divorce papers, I had them sent to Bobby. I knew exactly when he received them because almost immediately after, my phone rang. It was Bobby, furious and incredulous. He ranted about how absurd I was being, claiming he was planning to file for divorce anyway. His shock escalated when he learned about the impending legal actions I had initiated. The call was heated, filled with accusations and disbelief, marking a clear turning point in what had become an irreparable rift. Bobby absolutely lost his temper during our phone call, and it reached a point where I just couldn't tolerate his anger any longer, so I hung up on him midway through. As the days led up to the court case, I was a bundle of nerves, filled with all sorts of apprehensions about the potential outcomes. Thoughts swirled in my head about what could go wrong. What if the court decided against me? What if I ended up losing the money I had made from selling the house? Despite these fears, I didn't let them overpower me. I dressed confidently, put on my best smile, and walked up to the courthouse ready to face whatever came my way. It was the day of the final hearing for our divorce, and it turned out incredibly well. Not only was I able to retain all the proceeds from the sale of the house, but the court also ruled that Bobby had to pay me a significant sum in alimony as a legal obligation. This outcome was unexpected, especially getting more money from Bobby, but it felt justified considering the emotional and mental toll his actions had taken on me. Accepting this money felt like reclaiming my dignity. The disapproval and dismay on their faces as the verdict was read brought a certain sense of vindication to me. They had probably never anticipated that their actions would backfire so severely. They might have thought they could manipulate me without consequence, but instead, they ended up losing significantly themselves. Since then, life has been relatively calm. I did receive a harsh call from my mother-in-law criticizing my actions, accusing me of being selfish and incapable of caring for others, even going as far as to say I could never start my own family. Despite this, I've been able to move forward. I used the money from the house sale to secure a new apartment for myself, where I could finally save without the constant pressure and demands from others. However, a part of me wonders about the measures I took. Was taking him to court too extreme? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, so please share your opinions in the comments below. It was a surprising turn of events, but one I felt was necessary under the circumstances. As I scrolled through the comment section of my latest post, the range of opinions was striking. Let me share a snapshot of what people were saying. Some commenters were actually defending Bobby, saying, "What's the big deal about giving your parents $420,000 if you have $550,000? But on the flip side, many disagreed vehemently. They supported my perspective, pointing out that we've been financially assisting his parents for years while trying to establish our financial security and save for our house. The debate in the comments was clearly divided. There was a significant camp that criticized my decision to sell the house and keep the money, labeling it disrespectful since the house was legally under my name. However, about half of the commenters backed my action, asserting that it was exactly what I needed to do under the circumstances. So let's open this up for more discussion. Drop your comments below and let's dive deeper into this situation.
"Hello, Amelia." My mother-in-law's voice crackled through the phone, sharp and commanding. "We've moved to a condominium. You do nothing, so you should get down on your knees, apologize to us, and be our servant," she demanded. I gripped the receiver tightly, feeling shock and anger pulse through me as I looked around my empty, silent home. Everything felt wrong. Even my work documents and computer were gone. Heart pounding, I dialed Xavier's number, needing answers, but his voice was cold as he cut me off. "Mom told me that's what's going on, so you need to apologize to us first," he concluded. In that moment, I felt something inside me snap. My name is Amelia. I currently live with my husband, Xavier. When we first got married, I never thought this would happen. We live in a 2-story house with many rooms. About 3 months into our honeymoon, my in-laws came to our house. Xavier said, "I want to invite my parents here, where we are living now. Your parents are dead, but mine are still alive, and I want to reassure them that we are doing well." I nodded in agreement. My parents had already passed away before I married Xavier. My father died in a tragic accident when I was in high school, and my mother, who worked hard every day to earn money for my college tuition and other expenses, collapsed. She was rushed to the hospital and died after a long period of overworking. After that, I worked hard and became independent so that my parents would not worry. Then I met Xavier at a blind date arranged by a friend from college. If I were to get married, I wanted it to be with someone who also cares about their parents. Xavier really loves his parents. He shed tears when he heard that both of my parents had passed away. I think he cried because he felt sorry for me not being able to take care of my parents. I had never met someone who sympathized with me so much, so I thought I could have a good family with him. I had lost my parents early and knew that I would regret it if I did not take care of my husband's parents while I could. So I thought I could express my filial piety to his parents with him. I was willing to be filial to the parents of the person I love, but they trampled on my pure feelings without mercy. A week after Xavier asked me to show the house to his parents, they came to our home. "Oh my, the inside of the house is quite old. I heard it wasn't new, but I can see it now," my mother-in-law said, rubbing her chin. "It is true that this house was built a long time ago." I didn't respond, as she was right about that. "Isn't it?" Xavier agreed with my mother-in-law. "I have been thinking about how shabby this house is too." "I guess you are right, Mom." There was no way to deny his mother's opinion at that moment, and that was okay, I thought. Then my father-in-law asked, "If you were planning to live in a house for a long time, wouldn't it be better to buy a condo unit or a new house? Why didn't you do that?" Xavier glanced at me. I was about to explain, but Xavier interrupted, saying, "Amelia said this is a place for us, and she wouldn't listen to me. I thought, well, we are newlyweds anyway, so I might as well listen to my wife. So we decided to live in this house." When Xavier said it like that, it felt as if he was accusing me of wanting us to live here out of selfishness. My in-laws looked at me quizzically. I knew I had to say something, but just as I was about to speak, Xavier slapped me on the back and said, "Well, Xavier and Amelia are doing fine. Mom, there's nothing for you to worry about." My in-laws looked at us with anxious eyes, which made me anxious too. They had plans to visit the theater nearby, so they looked around the house and quickly left. I couldn't correct what Xavier had said, leaving them bewildered. I had no idea that my in-laws' misunderstanding would later come back to haunt me, but the signs were there. After seeing our house, my mother-in-law started contacting me, always when I was busy at work. "You know, Amelia, as someone who's been married for a long time, let me tell you this. Don't expect your husband to do whatever you want. You are an adult and a wife now. You miss your parents because they weren't around to spoil you, didn't you? But that's not the same thing. Wives shouldn't be spoiled." When I saw these sermons piling up in my messages after work, my head was spinning. Why do I have to look at this stuff after work? I sighed, because I didn't expect her to say such a thing, but I knew why. When Xavier invited my in-laws to our house, he spoke in a way that could be taken as my selfishness for living here. I think he interrupted me on purpose when I tried to correct him. After they left, when I told him he should correct what he said to his parents about my selfishness, he wrinkled his brow and said, "Well, why don't you just go ahead and do it? Dad and Mom already agreed with me. It's nothing for you to worry about. Oh, don't bother calling them about it, okay? If you suddenly said something different from what I said, they would be so confused that they wouldn't be able to eat their meals." I had a different opinion. I don't think telling them that what Xavier said was wrong would make them lose their appetite. When I first met them, they were eating their food scrumptiously, even when I was talking about my parents passing. It is impossible for them to lose their appetite over something as trivial as this, but I didn't want anything to happen to them, so I decided to keep quiet, as Xavier had asked me to. I had no desire to live with them in my house. and I thought the only times I would interact with my parents-in-law would be during Thanksgiving and New Year's. I wasn't sure if I could stay quiet about it, especially after unexpectedly receiving a lecture from my mother-in-law over the phone. I saw the notification, didn't respond, but went home and showed Xavier the messages. "Hey Xavier, I've been getting a lot of messages like this from your mother." Xavier was surprised, his eyes widened, not expecting my mother-in-law to contact me like this. Okay, he told me. "I told you not to say anything. I'll talk to my mother." He immediately called her on the spot, but Xavier was always doing things that weren't good for me. He called his mom and said, "Please don't send Amelia these strange messages, or I'll end up in trouble with her." All I did was show him the messages his mother had sent. I never said I was upset, but this would only make my in-laws think I was being unreasonable, even though they're the ones who would likely preach to me the next day, regardless of what Xavier actually said. They could still end up viewing me poorly, even if Xavier didn't phrase it that way. Just because I wanted them to hold back from sending me those messages, I feel as though I've had to let go of everything. I thought I would be with him to help provide for my in-laws, but that feeling was shattered as soon as we got married. After that, I spent my time working from home. But one day, while I was busy, I kept getting messages from my mother-in-law. I checked my notifications to see what was going on. "Xavier told me you're always at home," she wrote. "Irma and I are going to the theater this evening, so I'm going to stay at your house until then." I shuddered immediately and replied, "I'm home, but I work from home. I can't entertain you both because I'm busy working." But my mother-in-law replied, "You're not really working. You're just staying at home. Don't lie to me just because you don't want to entertain me. I don't like that about you. As a housewife, you should know better, shouldn't you?" It's true that I work from home, and Xavier knows that. So why is my mother-in-law getting the wrong information from him? I'm starting to lose faith in Xavier as well. He has been trying to make me look bad to my in-laws. At first I thought it was a coincidence, but now I'm convinced. For all I know, Xavier is trying to make things worse between me and my in-laws. But I don't know why he thinks that. He has been and continues to be a disappointment to me. Just when I had forgotten about Xavier, the intercom rang. Sure enough, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, Irma, were at the door. I invited them in, thinking maybe Irma, who was young, would understand my work-from-home business and tell my mother-in-law about it. "Mom," I said, my voice firm, "as I told you in my message, I work from home. I can't entertain you both while I'm at work." My mother-in-law sighed exaggeratedly and said, Okay, enough with the lies, get on with serving the tea." She pushed me toward the kitchen. I looked at my sister-in-law, Irma, hoping she might listen to me, but she was playing on her phone, not even looking at me. I'd like a Coke," she muttered. I replied, "We don't have Coke in our house." Irma immediately sat down on the sofa with a sullen look on her face. "Well then, just serve me a juice, whatever it is. You are living on my brother's money, so why don't you at least entertain us, his family? You are our servant," she stated, glaring at me. My eyes widened. It's true that I married Xavier, but that does not make me a servant of my in-laws. So I retorted, "I don't know what Xavier told you, but I'm not living on his money. I'm doing my job, and you're interrupting my work." I knew that if I didn't speak up, they would only look down on me. So I grabbed Irma's arm, made her stand up, and led her to the door. "Hey, I'm Xavier's sister. How dare you not treat me well and then throw me out of the house? What are you thinking, you devil of a wife?" she shouted. After Irma, I also kicked my mother-in-law out of the house. Staring at me, she blushed and shouted, "I went to all the trouble welcoming a poor woman like you. How dare you? If Xavier had abandoned you, you would have starved." I looked at them both coldly. "I can live without Xavier, so you are the ones who have been deceived by Xavier's lies, and treating me like a servant, you idiot," I exclaimed and slammed the front door firmly. Both Irma and my mother-in-law were screaming at the door for a while, but I ignored them, and soon enough, they were gone. I guess they were worried about what the neighbors might think. I don't have to worry because I know the neighbors will be more on my side than Xavier's, no matter how much noise they make. Then Xavier came home that day and told me what his mother and Irma had said to him. "I can't be with someone who neglects my family. If this happens again, I will divorce you immediately. So write your name down." He handed me the divorce papers with his name on them. It was something I had never wished for, but then I've gotten to the point where I want to get rid of my husband, who is always telling false stories about me to his family and undermining my status. I quickly signed the divorce papers. I signed the divorce papers without delay and stored them at the back of the cabinet. Later that night, I took them out and kept them with me. The next day, I left for a meeting and came home to find the house deserted. My room was untouched, but the documents and computer in my workroom were gone. As I rushed to call Xavier, I was interrupted by a call from my mother-in-law. "Hello, Amelia. Me, my husband, Xavier, and Irma are in a condominium. You do nothing, so you should get down on your knees, apologize to us, and be our servant. I won't tell you where we live until you get a real job. You'd better take this opportunity to realize how helpless you are," she concluded. I felt something snap in my head. I hung up the phone and immediately called Xavier. He picked up. "Mom told me that's what's going on, so you need to apologize to us first," he said. I interrupted him. "I will file for divorce, and if you don't return my things that you stole from me today, I will file a police report. And the furniture in the house was originally stuff that I bought, right? I will file a report on that too. Once we get past the date, you are out. I will make you all be treated like criminals." I hung up. Then I quickly took the divorce papers to the municipal office, sending them in to prevent them from being revoked without my permission. While I was sitting in a coffee shop, drinking coffee and reading a novel to calm down, Xavier had hired a contractor to return my belongings, and the furniture had been put back while I was away. When I returned home, Xavier was there and was just moving the last of my belongings with a contractor. I started up my computer, which I use for work. "What the hell did you want with my computer?" I asked. Xavier, in a cold sweat, replied, "My sister wants a new computer, and we thought that the one you were using was a good one." I checked the contents of the computer in amazement. "Good for you," I replied, "because if you had deleted any work-related data, my company would have filed a huge lawsuit against you and your family." He turned pale. I glared at him. "I see you've moved to a townhouse. Where the hell did the money come from? You told me you couldn't afford the rent and the living expenses because you owed $20,000 and wanted to pay it off. You moved into this house that I inherited from my parents so I could take care of you while you paid off your debt. Where the hell did you get all that money?" I asked angrily. Xavier shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, I didn't have any debt. My mom and dad wanted to live in a condo, so I was saving up for it," he muttered. I sighed heavily. "I will get a lawyer. I will ensure that I receive my share of the money, which I have been contributing toward our living expenses throughout my entire life. I will also charge you for the money you owed me, because you always told me you didn't have enough money," I added firmly. He cried, but I'm not just going to forgive him just because he cried. During the meeting with the lawyer, he agreed to pay me a substantial amount to prevent me from revealing that he had deceived me. He mentioned that they had moved to a townhouse, but after losing all their money at once, they could no longer afford to live there. Each time my lawyer summoned him, he used his paid vacation days, which stalled our discussions. When his boss eventually asked, "Why do you need so much time off?" he explained it was for meetings with my lawyer and me. Shortly afterward, his boss called me saying, "It's awful that you could receive alimony after cheating on Xavier." "Is Xavier lying to you as well?" I replied. With a sigh, I gave the boss my name, suggesting he look me up online. His boss apologized to me as he should have. I'm a businesswoman earning $600,000 a year, so it's no surprise my name is well known online. I kindly explained Xavier's actions to him, believing that Xavier's only reason for speaking poorly of me to others was his pride, unable to accept that his wife made more money. I didn't want our marriage to be the source of false rumors, so I asked his boss to correct things. My company does business with Xavier's employer, so he couldn't refuse. Because of this, Xavier's salary was slashed, and he was demoted, leaving him unable to afford his apartment rent. Facing the reality that he couldn't sustain himself, Xavier finally told his family the truth. Later that day, my mother-in-law called me relentlessly. Checking my phone, I saw 47 missed calls. She's so persistent. I was working as I'd explained many times, but she didn't get it. I sighed and blocked her number, The next day, my in-laws and Irma showed up at my door. Xavier is sorry, his mother began. Stop making things harder for him. Irma chimed in. I didn't know my brother didn't make that much money. He always seemed rich. You can live with us in our house if you want. I opened the upstairs window and picked up my phone. Hello, police? There are 3 suspicious people causing a disturbance in front of my house right now. They left quickly. Xavier's parents, who had quit their jobs assuming he'd support them, received no help with the condo rent. Irma, who was unemployed after being fired for her bad attitude, joined them as they all had to move into a cramped 1-bedroom apartment. They blamed Xavier, saying, "It's your fault." After a few months, Xavier couldn't tolerate the situation, ran away, and was ultimately fired for missing work repeatedly without notice. I heard that the 3 of them are now homeless, after being evicted, but I don't know the full details. I'm still living in the house my parents left me, but I'm considering moving to a condo or a 1-bedroom apartment.